Hello everybody, once again, this is Spencer, and I am here to show off something that I did a week or so back, or however far back it is. I created this video that you see on screen, although you can't really get this specific view on YouTube, where there are 5 of me in a room, and we're talking back and forth to each other, and the sound is actually panned correctly so that it's coming from each character, no matter where you turn your head in the 360. So even if I am looking over this way, if this character is speaking, his sound feels like it's coming over there. And that is using a wonderful art called Ambisonics or Codex or something. I'm not sure. We'll get into exactly how I did it in a second. That's the point of this. But to help us along and to ask questions in case I forget something, I have with me my friend Rem, who is an aspiring sound designer. Say hi, Rem.
Hi, it's me.
Yep. And so as I go through kind of my process to do this, Rem is here to ask questions and to be an audience to the saying what had happened, so that I actually make sure I cover everything more or less.
Yeah, I hope I'm helpful.
I'm sure you will be. So first and foremost, to pull off a scene like this at all, you have to kind of start with a script. And there are many programs out there to allow for script writing and easy script editing and templating. In this case, I happen to use writerduet.com, which has a free version that I use. And you don't even need that. Google Docs works just fine. There's other things. I just use this because it was really easy to get like character names versus dialogue versus parentheticals really easy. So I use that. I wrote out a really short script here. I hesitate to call it a screenplay, mostly because I am more used to like stage directions, so it doesn't really have a lot of things that are important for video. It's all dialogue, but that's fine. But to make sure that since there's only one of me recording again these 5 characters, to make sure I stayed in sync, I then went through and recorded all of this in a cue track where I just read the script to myself and recorded it in Audacity. And then I took that track and I put it to video. A video that started with a count-in to make sure that all of the different characters were I could synchronize easily later. But well, this will be interesting. There I am talking to myself just on the left side because that was the only side I was going to be listening to. But I have the kind of teleprompter scrolling and the audio playback. So I had the audio in my ear, teleprompter set up in front of me so I could read it as I went. And that seemed to work rather well. There were some other random interesting things that happened to synchronize some other bits of the video that I don't necessarily want to go into, but for this, to synchronize all of the characters and make sure that they were all talking at the correct time, saying their lines, not just at the correct time, but in the correct amount of space they had, I found pre-recording the script in about the same intonations and delivery that I was going to give very useful, and then I just had that playing in my ear the whole time, which was, fun, exciting, and sometimes led to me messing up a few lines. But then at the end of the recording session, what I ended up with was actually 6 files. So I recorded one empty plate, which you can kind of see here, where I actually had the same count-in happening in the background, mostly because then I had that same beeping happening throughout the room, so that it would be picked up on my microphone. And the black magic that I did to make sure the video on the TV happened at the same time as the video on the prompter, I'm not going to get into. But after that, aside from the plate, I also had 5 individual files with me sitting alone in a room reading off that character's part. And because of the weird perspective shift that happens when the 360 video is squished into 2D, I did have to make sure that I was getting the full 360 every time, because I couldn't just take theoretically, if with different software and a different workflow, I could get a 2D image of each of these areas and then stitch them together separately. for my purposes in here, it was easier to get the full 360 and just mask out the portion with the character in it for all 5 characters, and then I had all 5 of them sitting together. At this point, during the recording, I'm wearing a lav that is being recorded by Audacity, by my computer, kind of sitting over here in the corner, you can see it. But when I'm doing the video editing here, where I'm just trying to synchronize them, I'm actually using the onboard recordings from the camera. And so that was enough to get the video in sync here to take me into the next step. And the next step is where things get really exciting and interesting. I did have to make a render of this to use for that next step, but my next step was here in Reaper. And here's where the actual audio things happen, and where I'm hoping that Rem will be excited, because this is the fun stuff. So I'm using Reaper because it's fairly cheap, but Reaper itself doesn't have built in the functionality to do the ambisonic mixing. To do that, I actually got a different free plugin from Facebook, of all people, that is a Facebook 360 Spatializer. Actually, it's like a ton of different plugins altogether, but the Spatializer is the big important one. And we'll get into exactly what you're seeing on screen here first. But first I want to talk about the layout of the Reaper tracks here. Because this is all based on a template that came with all the other plugins. I did try to build a session on my own, but it did not work correctly. It worked mostly correctly, and then it got to time to export, and it just didn't. So I sideloaded it all here into the template. So I was able, using again that the count in at the beginning of the videos and the loud beeps that were recorded on each character's track, I was able to synchronize all 5 vocal tracks together. I also had the room noise off the camera for the plate. It sounded terrible, so I didn't actually use it, but I had it. So I was able to synchronize them all, and you can see where one character is talking, and then the next comes in, and then the next comes in here in the waveforms. But the way this works, in order to pan correctly in the Ambisonic 360 space, each of these mono tracks, if we actually come down here to the routing, you can see that they're not going to the master. The master send here is actually unchecked. They're not going to the master bus at all. Instead, they're going to a 360 master, which is this channel over here, channel 6. And channel 6 also doesn't go to the master send. It goes to the control plugin on track 7. And it has a couple of own plugins that weren't actually important for this, but the control plugin was, because this control plugin over here is where we set the size of the room. Because for the ambisonic mixing to work, it kind of has to know what the reflections and the reverb of the space are supposed to sound like. So I measured the room, put in the width, the length, and the height. I had to convert to meters from feet, because all of my measuring tapes are in imperial, because of course they are. And then it built the room noise around there. One other thing that's important here in this control window is the decode binaural. How do you actually pronounce that word? Binaural? Binaural. Anyway,
It's a little fuzzy.
Yeah. But it decodes it to the 2 channels of the headset that I was mixing on, basically. And that was important while I was mixing, but I had to make sure that I unchecked that before I bounced it. We'll get into that a bit more later. But the control sets the size of the room, and then each track individually, you can see, has this Facebook 360 Spatializer plugin. And so if we look at the Spatializer, this is what's really fun, and the interesting thing happens. First off, it has the video loaded. So the very rough cut video, not rough cut, but the synchronized, I guess, video from Vegas, I put in here so that I can see the actual space And then I can actually take this point. This is just because it's mono. This is one track. I can actually click and drag the source of this audio around, and then I just kind of put it on my face because that's where I want the sound to be emanating from. And that gets the vertical height, the actual height of it, and the horizontal placed correctly in the 360 space. And then the distance away, I actually, during recording, I pulled out a measuring tape, measured the distance from my face to the camera, made note of all of these, turned them into meters again, and put all of that information here, so that as I was building the pan, and it was very simple, I could just open up one of the channels, click and drag, put the dot on top of my face, and then set the distance to however far away I was sitting from the camera, and that is what made the sound come from the correct direction. Now, there's a whole bunch of other stuff in here.
Question.
Yes, go ahead.
Random. Do you know if this is only for stationary objects or if you can move the objects throughout the room and it will follow?
I have not played with it, but there is an option over here labeled tracking. You probably can't read that on the screen share, but that is supposed to be able to track the object in the video and follow it around. So theoretically, yeah, it should be able to follow an object. I just didn't have a need to use that, so it didn't.
Interesting. Okay, continue. Sorry.
Yeah. So then all of the tracks then are placed in their correct spot in the 360 space around, and you can see down here, based on where the front of the camera is, based on all of that, you can see how those are interacting. And then to bounce it all, have to make the loop selection of the important bits, and then make sure that I'm only selecting the control plugin track. This is very important. And then I also have to go into the control plugin, make sure that it's no longer decoding binaural. That word is going to trip me up forever. Anyway, make sure it's not set to take it down to 2 tracks anymore. Then we come in to render as is normal, but we're just rendering the selected track, the stems. The bounds can either be the entire project or the selected regions, whichever works better. And then it's important to note that I am exporting in 16 channel. Ambisonics, as I understand it, based just on this limited interaction, kind of has 3 flavors: first order, second order, and third order Ambisonics. First order is actually only 4 channels, and it's what YouTube uses. Second order, I think it's only like 9 channels, but third order is 16, and so I decided to just export it in the full 16 here. And then the magic of this Facebook 360, it has its own audio encoder, where we can go through and set options like, what is the format? Well, the YouTube video, which is using the first order Ambisonics, or Ambix specifically. Like, there's a couple of different Ambisonic formats, like Fuma exists, but Ambix, first order Ambix is what YouTube uses, so that's what I clicked on. And then I loaded in the WAV file that I created. I loaded in the video file that I had gotten out of Vegas at this point. I had rendered it once, taken it back in, faded it out, and rendered it again, and made sure everything was in sync. It was kind of a pain, but loaded that video file in and had it encode them together. And with that got us to our final product here.
Well, this will be interesting.
Where you can pan around and hear the characters talking.
It's an interesting canvas to work with.
In relation to where the position of
whole scene
the actual view is. So yeah. It's actually so much simpler than I was afraid it would be when I was first looking into how to do it. Because Facebook is actually on a really big 360/VR kick. That's why they own Oculus, or maybe Oculus is why they are. I don't know. But because of this Facebook plugin, which does not just work for Reaper, but Reaper is the free to use right now and cheap to buy in the future version that I went for this. But because of that, it made it really simple to do what I wanted to do here. So now with that kind of word vomit, word barf out of the way, Rem, did you have any other questions in the midst of all of that?
I mean, whenever we were talking about this earlier, it sounded a whole lot more complicated.
I mean, it wasn't helped. A lot of the complication was in the making sure they were all synchronized.
And actually getting everything on video and recorded.
Yeah.
The actual mixing of it, Ambisonics, I mean, if you weren't just doing voices, if you were doing more sound effects and like things are happening outside and all that, I think you'd have to like, expand into the tracking, and then it would get more complicated because then you have to like just do more. But I think with how you have it and how everyone's stationary, it worked out pretty well and pretty simply. I'm a little bit surprised. It's interesting.
Yeah. Well, and that is one thing that actually I was helped out with in the scripting stage, because I knew what I wanted to test here were two things. One, can I do the audio panning the way I wanted to? Testing the audio panning, and then the second was testing the synchronization between characters, where if I am the only person in the room 5 different times, how do I make sure that 2 versions of me are interacting in a believable way? Mm-hmm. And so I wrote the script for that with minimal movement, not a lot of even talking over each other, so some space there. And then with the idea that I would just put the sounds then in their different zones in space. Back here in Reaper, they would all live in their own special little bubble and wouldn't have to really interact or move about too much. But as I understand, the abilities of this spatializer and of this mixing and the Facebook 360 stuff is that it is possible to do sounds moving across the frame and all of that fun stuff. I haven't had a need to look into it, so I haven't.
I mean, that's just something that caught my interest.
Yeah.
But
absolutely.
Yeah, and like I think I mentioned before, Vegas, you should be able to do quite a bit of this in Vegas.
Theoretically, I haven't actually looked and seen what kind of audio DAW type stuff is available in Vegas, and that'll be a thing to look at in the future. In fact, I have a whole list of things that I want to try and fix in the future. One of them, and this seems like the silliest thing, but the first thing that I really want to do is with this TV, because there's supposed to be a really cool looking image on this TV that's looping and has a bit of fun motion in it. But I forgot that for a screen to show up properly on camera, you have to basically turn the brightness to 0 and then crank the contrast up. And so it just is this bright, washed out thing.
Yeah, that's definitely a thing.
It's not helped by the fact that I was also experimenting at this as I filmed this and using a slightly smaller, lower resolution than my camera was capable of to try and save on storage space, but it was too low. It doesn't really look good for this at all. I think it's technically 4K, which is like 3820 or something, but when those 3,000 some odd pixels are spread in a circle all the way around, that's just not enough. And so the higher resolution on my camera is just over 5K, which you wouldn't think is a big change, but it really is. An extra 2,000 pixels horizontally and at least another 1,000 or so vertically. It's a lot of pixels and changes a lot of how the image looks. And then the other big thing that I am hoping to be able to change in the future, but it requires actually more hardware, is picking up the room noise better. As I mentioned, my plate track here, I had the noise, the just an empty room noise from that I was thinking about panning it or mixing in a little bit. But it just sounded so bad. The onboard microphones for this camera are not good. They're really not good.
So with that, did you just record like 30 seconds of blank room tone from the camera?
No, in fact, I recorded the entire about 3-minute segment of blank room tone from the camera.
Okay. But you were speaking through the lav and not using the camera onboard mic, correct?
The final product is the lav recording. That is correct. For the first pass synchronization, well, for the synchronization pass, I guess, and the initial video edit, I did use the audio tracks from the onboard mic to synchronize the video, just because that was the easiest way to do it.
Sorry, you cut out there for reference?
Yeah. My reference track, the onboard audio, is what I used to synchronize the video.
Okay.
And then after I had the video, after I had all the masks together and the 5 put together and had that exported to go into Reaper, that's when I added the better audio quality from the lav recording.
Right. So whenever you're doing that for room tone specifically, you want to use whatever mic you're going to be speaking into. Just my experience is then you'll get different mics have different tones. And so it'll change the gain staging and the sensitivity of the room tone that you're getting. And so to get consistency, you want to use the same microphone across it. And then you can kind of control the levels in the lav
Fair enough.
more so that you can not get so much internal noise. Because I know that cameras produce a lot of internal noise.
Yeah.
So if you just place the lav in the center of the room and let it go while you're making no noise at all, then you'll have a much better and cleaner blank slate for kind of room noise, unless you're talking about like the Foley of, clothing moving, like the little bit of movement that you are doing.
Yeah.
But then that should be picked up by the lav on the character.
Yeah.
During
It is worth noting with that I don't silence any of the characters between their lines. There is still tone. That's not move things around. There is still tone happening in the silence here. It's not actually silent. In fact, there's like a giant cough at some point that is really annoying, but I didn't get rid of it.
Whenever you layer that kind of ambient noise, it's going to get messy.
Yeah.
And so having like one blank track of room tone and then just in the actual silent parts, kind of bringing it down just a little bit, like not recording, but just kind of mixing it.
It is an interesting conundrum, and in the final product, I think it turned out okay, but because even the room noise then that the microphone is picking up is directional, and it's coming from the specific direction of where that microphone was sitting in space. So, yeah, I don't have really any... That is one thing to note, though, about the 360 encoder, which I think I accidentally closed. Yeah, I did. That's all right. But the 360 encoder, actually, it's probably just here if I grab it. Facebook 360 Spatial Workstation. And so the encoder here does have a spot for headlock stereo. That's stuff that is not panned in the same way as all the other ambisonic / spatial tracks. So if you want like a music track or something that doesn't change, it's just always in the proper stereo that it was originally mixed in, or like room noise, I think would be appropriate to put there, or perhaps a narrator maybe. That goes in the headlocked file. Yeah. Which, again, in this template they have here, they have the 3D master and the control plugin, and all of the spatially panned tracks need to go through those. But they also have a couple of tracks for headlocked audio and a headlock master. This is specifically stuff that is not supposed to be panned. And the idea is you do one bounce with the control plugin, you do one bounce with the headlock master, and then in the encoder you put those 2 wave files and your video file in. And so as you're mixing, you can hear all the tracks together, but to encode it properly, they have to be separate.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah, anyone who is interested in doing some of the ambisonic mixing and using the Facebook audio spatial workstation, or whatever they call it, I think Facebook 360 Spatial Workstation, I think is what it's called. It does come with an instruction book, because of course it does, and I highly recommend that you read through that and actually use the template. I tried to get away without the template, I really did, but it just did not work. So in the end, had to use the template anyway, and we'll be continuing to use it in the future as I do more of these. Also worth noting, there are microphones out there that record ambisonic already. Most of them record first order ambisonic, which is 4 tracks. Some do, some really expensive ones will have more capsules on them and will do more than those 4. But the Spatializer plugin here is built to handle first order ambisonic and second and third order ambisonic even. In its panning, in the pan and in the mix, so that in addition to the mono sources like I used for this video, you can also have ambisonic sources that have that data already inside of them, which is actually kind of my plan for room tone possibly going forward, is to have one of those recording the room during the plate or just in general, and then have the spot microphones slowly mix, at a low level mix in afterwards to kind of flesh out the tone and the directionality a bit more. But I believe, unless you have other comments or questions, Rem?
Not off the top of my head.
All right. So that will then be the end for this recording. I want to thank anybody who has watched this. Please go and watch also the original video. The fact that the original video is less than 3 minutes, and then all of my explanations that I've ever done for it are much more than that. It's just, I am that excited about it and how it works. But I want to thank you all for watching and hope you enjoy it. And we'll see you all in the next one.